right. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to have you joining us here today. We're really excited to start this conversation and get going here. So, first up, if you want to use the chat to introduce yourself, tell us where you're joining from. We've also got a really exciting poll going up right now to let us know how you're feeling about engagement. What does it look like for you? How is your strategy going along? Because that's what we're talking about today. So, we sent some information out as you were registering that 49% of marketers state that audience engagement is the most significant contributing factor to having a successful event. Engagement seems to be up. 71% of associations are saying their members are more engaged. 83% said webinar participation is up year over year. So that's telling us that your members are ready to meet, your attendees want to meet, they're embracing the digital nature of our space now. And we're so excited to have Tonya Almond, an engagement strategist, with us today with the Tag Agency to talk about the huge elephant in space in the room. It's so big, I don't even know that it fits a room. So we're excited to chat with you today. And Tonya, let's kick it off. Let's dive right in. It's a big topic. So what's the first step to figuring out engagement?
Well, I think, first of all, thanks for having me here. It's always great to have a conversation with you and team at Juno. So excited to be here. And we want to hear from all of you in the audience as far as what it is you're trying to solve, right? Because there's different things about engagement. And I think that, some of the statistics that you shared, what really that means to me, that 83% and that 70%, is that your audience wants to be connected. They want to be connected to relevant content and they want to be connected to their peers, right? So, when you think about creating that engagement, it really is dialing in a little bit about what your audience wants are and what their needs are. You can't just, it's been years since one size fits all, right? That just has not been something that has been as effective. And so, in the digital moment that, we're talking about here and how you engage them is how do you want to do that, right? Is it short snippets? Do they need longer content? In my years of associations, rarely did somebody attend a meeting that desperately needed their CE credits, right? There's so many different ways that people can earn their CE, whether it's at regional meetings, state meetings, online. And because of the last few years, that acceptance of online CE credits has changed. But are they trying to maintain their license, right? So I think when we think about figuring out engagement, you really, I say this all the time, you have to design that engagement strategy for your audience and what their needs are. And it's not, to me, when you look at whatever industry you're sitting in, whether it's, you're in healthcare and medical, or it's, CPAs or attorneys, or, whatever that audience may be, you know, what is their actual, what is going on in their lives, in their industry, that you can help solve for, right? Because that's what we're trying to do as an organization, right? Whether you are working in a corporation or you're working for an association, you're trying to help them in one way, shape, or form. Be a higher producer, more content, and as far as learning, professional development, personal development. But I also think that that human connection piece, going back to the data of what everyone's saying, people do want to be connected, and it doesn't matter if it is digital or that face to face. There's certain energy that you're going to get in that face to face, but we also know that that face to face can help build the FOMO in that digital world, so that maybe that you're converting them to that face to face opportunity. I do think the other thing when we think about your engagement strategy is, how often does your audience want to connect with you? Because people are human, right? They're doing, you and I just talked about it, right? You're, what's on your to-do list the rest of today for your job, and
Yep.
then what you're doing after hours to get prepared for the trip you're taking, right? Like all of those things have to get crammed into our lives, right? Like it's spring, it's finally not raining in Chicago. There is so much baseball going on in my life, right? So
Yeah.
it's balancing those things. And so are all of our members. They're all dealing with the rest of life despite their day job. And then if they're involved in your organization, that's even more that they're putting, on their proverbial plate to be involved. So when you think about your engagement strategy, do they want the one-on-one? Do they want to be, surrounded by some of your leadership and influencers? There's certain ways that you can do, things that aren't taxing on your team. And because that I think is always a big deal. Like, there's no more room to do anything else, right? Everyone is busy or we're working on this. And so we can't take our eyes off the prize. I also think that there's, some of those low hanging fruits to find out what's important to them, right? Are they burned out? Um, what does, when I think the other thing the last couple of years, and everybody has been using the H word, hybrid, right? Um, when we go back and talk about an event digital strategy, does everything have to be hybrid? And I think that, your audience deserves a choice, right? What are they looking for? But even if you do some sort of a hybrid experience, not every engagement within that needs to be blended where you're bringing your audiences together.
Agreed. I'm so team non-synchronous hybrid, I think so long we thought hybrid meant simultaneous, two audiences at the same time, blending them, and that doesn't necessarily work for everybody. So I love that point. Something else you mentioned was, using digital to expand, the in-person experience, create that FOMO. Something else that I really think about when talking about digital engagement is the pre-engagement before you get on site, right? So I'm generally pretty introverted at in-person events. I'm not going to walk up to a crowd of people I don't know and just start introducing myself. But if I have a way to engage with some of those people online before I get to the in-person event, finding those people that I want to connect with seems a little bit less scary because we've already met. We got the small talk out of the way digitally so that when we are in person together, we can really focus on, getting to business or whatever conversations need to be had. And so
Right.
with thinking about that, and you mentioned earlier, meeting your audience where they are, what kind of engagement works for them? What do you do next? What does that actually look like? How do you figure out where they are, what they want, and how do you meet them there? What's that next step?
Right. Well, I think that pre-event, phase part of it is part of your marketing strategy too. And I think that we often want to, it's not one size fits all. So when you say you want to meet them digitally, sometimes that's, here's a promo of video sizzle on social media, or you have some of your leaders as influencers on social media in different platforms, and the audience is connecting there. If because I mean, we're all racing to get the app done and the platform up and all of those things, but
Yeah.
you can start engaging where your audience is already following you in meaningful ways, right? You can have communities, right? That whether they're living on your website or what your CRM platform may be, or Juno obviously has, the whole thing. But if yours doesn't, then there's other ways to do that within all the tools of social media. There's Facebook groups, there's LinkedIn groups, there's just again responding to the tweets. And I think that if your leaders of your organization get involved and do that, it also helps because again, whether it's your audience wants access to that or your stakeholders, right?
Yep.
I think that's a big part of it. But if you want to get started in building your strategy, I think you do need to know the answers to what we were saying before about what your audience needs are, right? Do they need a lot of CE credit? Are they really looking for that human engagement? And then create some of those opportunities. Do community conversations like like this conversation today in a breakout room. If anybody wants to come on and add to the conversation, we would love for you to be able to do that, right? I think the other thing is because as the pandemic has eased up, right, and we're able to meet face to face successfully and healthy and safely, and I know I took my first plane ride without a mask, and I felt safe and I was happy, and that was my choice to not wear a mask on the plane. But I think everyone at this point needs to do where be where they are. But when we talk about a digital engagement strategy, it isn't just your meeting and your biggest asset, and I think that we've become so hyper focused on that one big event or the five big events that we are doing because it's what we've always done. And now how do we move forward and blend this and offer these things? And the answer maybe is you don't have to. And I think that you also need to understand how you're defining success. What are the goals of that you're setting out to achieve with a digital engagement strategy? Do you need to do something 365? Is it all content based, or do you need to find a way to bring the audience together to make these connections in peer-to-peer learning? Because I do think that peer-to-peer learning, if groups weren't doing it digitally, that's the piece that was missed from coming together face to face, right? So
That's
I
right.
really do think you have to break down. Um, Maybe it's by demographic, maybe it's by topic based. Your younger professionals, their needs from a peer-to-peer learning may be different than what the more experienced members may be. But there's also that reverse mentoring piece too that can be really powerful when you're bringing people together.
Absolutely. And I think you just hit on a great point of maybe even a small step forward is segmenting out that audience and creating those cohorts or niche groups of people, to engage with the larger audience, or, you find your tribe. That's why we go to meetings, to meet people, to
Right.
find people like us. I've always been, a big fan of going to industry events because that's my tribe of people. I don't think my parents still understand what I do, but then I
Right.
go to, a PCMA Rocky Mountain event, for example, tomorrow. And I know those are my people. They understand what I'm doing. So talk a little bit about how you can, have a big impact with those specific engagements, with a cohort. That sounds like a very easy first step for groups of, just having opportunities for them to segment out their memberships or their audience base into smaller cohorts.
Right.
How
I
can
think
that be an easy big win for them?
Yeah, you can ask some questions in your registration platform if it is based around an event. What are those things that, are really driving you? Now, you know, again, it depends on what vertical it is. You may know, right, if it's topic based, right? But it's a really quick survey monkey. It doesn't have to be a lot. Or if your audience responds to polls on social media, send them out that way. Send them out in a couple of different ways because you want to reach the audience where they are. So if they're not responding to your email surveys, do a quick poll on social media. And that's the whole point, is that means you're listening to them. Like, we can't just throw all these tactics out there and see what sticks. That's why, having some goals and objectives of how you're going to define success, and what is that measurement of metric that you're trying to achieve. I mean, we all have our bottom line financial metrics that we're trying to achieve, but again, are you looking to grow, followers? Are you looking to have more members on LinkedIn? Are you looking for more people to watch it? Because doing more content, if they're not consuming it because they don't have time, isn't the answer. So I do think that doing some of those quick polls to find out is really helpful. And then within, whether it's your digital platform or at your event, I think you can have those conversations. When I was at PCMA, we called them conversation starters, because for Convening Leaders 21, we were in the Juno platform. And that was one of the things that was really important to us, was that we could bring people together in that orchestrated, serendipitous way, and they could find a way to connect with their tribe.
Yeah.
And again, I think, actually, I just saw this comment. The truth is, people want to feel heard. They absolutely do. And
Yes.
so you need to listen to what they're saying and what they're not saying. You guys, sometimes if they're not buying something or if they're not watching it, then you maybe didn't hit the mark. So pivot, move away from it quickly, right? Like, I think we get so stuck on making it work. Maybe the product is awesome, but maybe the marketing just needs to be tweaked, right? Are you not hitting the right audience? Do a quick focus group, send it to some trusted advisors, send it to people that don't come to the event, right? And get some feedback that you can, some actual customer experience feedback that you can use to continue to evolve how you want to show up for your audience, because they're telling you,
Yes.
whether they're buying or not, buying literally. I mean, when I say that, I mean also just, watching your videos, right?
Yep.
How long are they staying engaged? Is your content too long and they're begging out after 70% of the videos done? I mean, there's a lot of messages in the content that you're already creating. You just kind of have to look at at the analytics and look at it a little bit in a different way to kind of decide, hey, my audience is telling me some pretty important information to use.
Yeah, and sometimes you make a good point of, things they're not saying are equally as important as to what they are saying.
Yes.
And we had a question come in from Diane in the Q&A. Outside of polls, and you kind of hit on this a little bit just a moment ago, what are your best practices to understanding your audience needs? Scientists are hard. And yes,
Yes.
scientists are super hard to engage online. A lot of them just come for the credit, they come for the science, they don't necessarily want the peer-to-peer learning. So what would be your suggestions for Diane?
Right. So, yes, I mean, obviously, every audience is a little bit different. If they're going to be registering for an event, can you get them during the registration? Because it's something they have to do. But then be brief because they don't want to spend a lot of time. We don't want to make buying the event cumbersome, right? But that is a way during the registration process that there's a couple of check boxes, right? A couple of questions that again makes it simple that you can then, and again, because you already have the demographic information in your registration system, you don't have to go back and be like, how old were they or how many years have they been practicing? And you can ask a couple of questions. And if you want to make it fun, you can do that too, right? It could be something around, part of their human behavior that you guys already know, right? You know them better than you think you do. And I think that sometimes we think, oh, I'm not a scientist, that I don't know that person. But is it somebody that's like your uncle, your brother, your dad, your sister? You do know a little bit more about them than you think you do, right? And people are creatures of habit. So I also think that asking them, right? If you're on a call and you have a few minutes, you ask some of those questions to some of those trusted advisors, and do some quick focus groups because you also want to hear from the stakeholders too, what's important to them, because they're going to help support in one way, shape, or form as well. And people want to be heard. To Annette's point, they want to feel that they're important.
Agreed. And I see Barbara, you have joined us here. Feel free to turn on camera and unmute yourself if you have a question for us. We're excited to have you join the conversation. So while Barbara's joining us here, I'm going to keep moving. Let's see. Diane just posted. We have another question. Thanks for the great suggestions. Do you have any engagement strategies online or in person to share for those who may be entering into the industry? So someone new to events, new to digital engagement, what would be your advice for them?
Can you elaborate on that? Okay, let me see. I can see the question. Engagement strategies online or in person to share for those who will be in. So again, I think that if is the audience, are you trying to bring them together for education purposes, right? Is it content driven that you're like, okay, here's this, again, how are you designing the session, right? If we're talking about content, right? Is it, you want it to be really interactive so they get that peer to peer, or is it really based on your audience needs? It's very technical and this expert needs to talk about it. And so then maybe post that session after that event session, then there's a roundtable discussion about it, right? And I think that, again, I spent so many years in associations. We have all these topics that we want to get out, and the scientific program committee is super excited, and they have all these experts. And one of the things that I think is really important as adult learning, which goes into the engagement,
Yep.
is making sure that they have the white space to process everything that they just learned, whether it's technical or professional or not. They need a little bit of that white space to say that here's how I've heard this and how could I apply it. Otherwise, it's not going to make a change in their behavior. So one of the ways to do that is some of that, even if you take out a block of time, which I know seems scary, you give people that time to connect with each other, whether it's at a round table or these conversations. That's why the networking breaks are so good, because people are talking to each other about what they just heard. You can do that in a way that they can have little meetups, right?
Yep.
Whether it's, you give them that structured time, you could do it around certain sessions and things like that. But if they're so overloaded that they can't process what they've heard, you've missed that engagement step, right? And that's why that coffee break, we call it, is so important, because they can say, Megan can say to me, oh my gosh, that, what Scott Galloway just said was so, blah, and
Yeah.
elaborate and continue to have those conversations, which those orchestrated serendipitous moments are where people find the value of being at events. And it doesn't matter if it's digital or face to face. If you build the space, even digitally, for them to have the conversation in these breakout rooms afterwards, right? Like a perfect example of this is, hey, we're going to go into a deep dive. And even, if you do a simulive session where it's like, hey, even if it's pre-recorded, you could ask the speaker to be on during the session so that they're in the chat, and the audience then gets to kind of have a private Q&A with them because the speaker was on, although the content had already been recorded. I think that's a powerful way as well,
Mhm.
to kind of build that engagement. It makes the audience feel like they've gotten something unique out of it because they've been able to directly respond, interact with the speaker, or whoever the influencer is.
Oh, I think that's great observation and certainly a way to extend the content. And, one thing I've always loved about convening leaders and some of the other conferences over the last few years, those coffee breaks aren't 15 minutes anymore. They're not, because
No,
thinking about how in 15 minutes I have to get a cup of coffee, talk with my neighbor, meet someone new, use the bathroom, potentially check some emails in 15 minutes and still make it, to the next session. And
no,
so the
yeah,
fact that the trend is now 30-minute, 45-minute breaks because
right.
that hallway conversation is just as valuable as when I'm sitting in a session room consuming content from a speaker or, whatever that might look like. So I think those are some great points. So just thinking back about this topic as a whole, engagement, is it really the elephant in the room? Is it in space? Is it that big of a problem? Are we struggling to figure out what engagement is, or is it just that we don't have the bandwidth to engage digitally in the way we want to?
Um, I think that, you know, I think the team is overwhelmed, right? Like with all, and it doesn't matter which team because you're all on the same team, even if you're sitting in different departments and things like that, even if events and education are separate and marketing, but you're all one team bringing together this experience or the whole engagement strategy, right? And I think it's important that we listen to each other of what the audience wants, right? Your membership team may have, um, you know, more direct content with your audience. So talk to them. What are they hearing? What do they want? Right. I don't know that. I think we have to give ourselves time and grace to say to slow down and listen. And I think that's really hard to do sometimes because we have to get our budgets done and we have to find space for the next event and the AVRFP and everything has changed in my world and all of those things. The nice thing, and so I think that it's also, so you have to listen, but then also think you have to ask who are the influencers around you that can help you build the engagement, right? So is it some of your speakers? I mean, you're going to Rocky Mountain chapter tomorrow. How many times have you posted it on social media that you're going or liked it or shared or,
Oh
right?
my,
Like,
so many
as a
times.
past president of the organization, people are
Yeah.
going to be like, oh, Megan, and you just won so people are listening to you because, hey, she's an influencer in our chapter, right? And people know you and they're like, ooh, I might get a chance to see her again. I met her at this one time, blah blah blah. So I do think that whether you build, here's this strategy and we're going to have this awesome, like, Zapnito community and everyone, whoever's going to build this community and we're going to do it on Juno, whatever that thing is, you have all this content, that's great. You still need to work with your marketing team to make sure that you're hitting the right targets of who wants to show up there. And I think a lot of us saw bigger communities that were showing up at our events in the last 2 years. So then how do we figure out what they want? Because they came because it was free and we're not doing the same thing, right? So
Yep.
um you got to try, and then if it doesn't work, then you got to be willing to kind of fail fast and move on to the next thing, right? And maybe it's, this didn't work for this audience, but it could work for this one, right? It may be wildly successful for this group. When you think about the business events industry, there's some really strong groups that always want to be together: corporate planners, medical meetings, a lot of the independent planners. Like, they want to stay connected. It works for them. Trade shows, right? Like now,
Yep.
medical has trade shows and all of that. So I kind of feel like that's blended and fits in. Um, but there are definitely some built-in groups in our own industry that love to stay connected and learn from each other and um, share those issues and learnings. And so again, those are built-in communities, regardless of where you go. Doesn't matter if you're at a PCMA or an MPI event. Like you're going to find that that group, and you're going to continue to meet with them. As far as our, the meetings and the organizations that we're all serving, you know, ask your speakers to do a social media post, right? And they can tag you, your marketing team can retag them. You're sharing that out. It gets people excited. It builds some engagement around it. Have them ask a question in the video. And then everybody has to comment below, right? Like, or you go on social media and you do something. I mean, um, that's one of the things I was asked to do when I was at Peace Media, like be one of the influencers, right? Like people want to hear what you have planned. Put the words in your president and CEO's mouth, put them out there if that's what's going to get your audience or your stakeholders geared up. Is it your president, right? Like ask them, put those words in their mouths. It doesn't have to be long, and have them ask a question. And that's engagement because they're being curious. And again, it goes back to you're saying you're a listening organization and you're hearing what they want.
I think that's a great point. I also think, in addition to leveraging maybe your executives, a lot of us have volunteer boards or committees, leveraging them as part of the conversation. They're already your super fans. That's why they volunteer with your organization or participate, or your customers. So leveraging their voice, their expertise, because that's also, I've for so long thought influencer marketing was just going to be kind of a fad of the TikTok, Instagram, Kardashians of the world. But it really is such a valuable tool in every industry, because you have those people that you follow. I'll follow and listen to pretty much anything Michael Dominguez has to say. He's a big influencer in, my event world. And I think that he has a lot of value to say and things that he talks about, but he also is really good of leveraging a lot of his other members on his, C-suite team to talk about their messaging. And, he's a big volunteer of MPI. And so they use him a lot to talk about MPI things. So I think beyond just your staff, looking at that volunteer base, those are your super fans, getting them involved, helping with this engagement, because I think you make a great point, and we say it a lot here at Juno. It's not if you build it, they will come anymore. If you build it and engage them, they will stay. And I think that is sort of the direction that we're moving. And I think right now it feels like a big elephant in the room, but it doesn't have to be. I
Right.
think when you start breaking it down, and again, going back to that why you exist, why you're doing it in the first place, will help solve some of that.
Yeah.
So, kind of transitioning a little bit, what are the revenue advantages of engagement? So I think we think a lot about, oh, it's in addition to this, that would be extra time, extra money. We've got to have a platform. What do we do? But really, what's the long-term revenue possibilities when you increase engagement?
So, I mean, it could start as easily as people becoming members, buying a product that, if you've engaged them in the right way and you've provided value to their life in one way, shape, or form, you've made them laugh, you've given them a stressful break in their day, right? Like, because everything we teach content, doesn't matter if we're talking about video content or in a meeting, it all doesn't have to be so serious. We just lived through a pandemic for 2 years, right? Like everything that's going on in the Ukraine, like there can be some levity in and reminding people that human piece of it, right? The empathy we are feeling for what's going on, right? But then also giving those moments of brevity, and being light about it. So if you've done that in one way, shape, or form, or you've given a tip to be, how to reduce stress, or one of those things that, when everybody talks about their mental wellness, it could be an additional product that they buy because now they're interested, they're hooked, like they're kind of like, oh, I kind of like what the Rocky Mountain chapter is doing, right? Like that was really cool. I keep using them as an example since you're going tomorrow. But that could be something that hooks. It could be a member. If they don't attend your meeting, it's okay. They became a member.
Yeah.
They may buy other products. Like not everything has to convert directly to I bought this event, or I bought, it could be a newsletter that they sign up to, and then there's more engagement and you have more touch points with them. It could be that, what if you get somebody else in the industry, like industry meaning your exhibitors and your sponsors, the people that are alongside with your organization's professionals building the industry you're in. It doesn't matter if you're in concrete or whatever, you both need each other, right? Physicians, pharmas, medical devices, there is a reason there is research and it is funded by pharma because they need each other. Like the
Yes.
science and the research has to be funded properly. It doesn't, and so that connection for them is important. So, and again, if you show that you can increase your engagement, that's more ROI for your exhibitors and sponsors and partners that you can say, here's the audience we're able to deliver to you because of the content. And it doesn't just have to be at the meeting. I mean, I get it. Everybody is ready to be back live. But if, again, it ties back, I think so many of the exhibitors and sponsors that I've worked with over the years, some of them do need brand recognition. Don't get me wrong. Like, hey, I'm a startup. I want, I
Yep.
need this. But they're not trying to just get across their brand because nobody knows what the new brand is, right? They either know
Mhm.
the product behind it or what it can do for you, right? What it can do for this doctor or the dentist or whoever it is you're trying to sell to. So they may need brand recognition, but so many of them want thought leadership. They want to be tied to something along those lines that says, this aligns with my brand values, right? Or I believe in this innovation, or I believe in this. And so I think, again, defining success with your stakeholders and how you can align them with um, either it's the people that are coming together, that they're the sponsor of this conversation starter, right? It doesn't, and again, if you can't have industry talk to them, then there's other ways that you can say, okay, here's how many people showed up, and you're giving them that value. And then on the back end, you're saying, okay, here's who you reached, right? And I think that that does go a long way. So it is about the numbers and understanding the data and being able to share that back with your stakeholders. They find the value in that when they can't actively participate, but they do want to be tied to thought leadership. Um, you know, some brand, I mean, Johnson and Johnson, I use it as my example. Like, they don't need brand recognition, right?
Right.
They want to be tied to thought leadership,
For sure.
and so everybody's got those Johnson and Johnsons in their industry that, but you have to ask them what they want, right? Because they'll tell you. They all have their goals and what they're being judged on, and how they're conducting their businesses.
So you mentioned, presenting on the data, showing some of that data. And I think, PCMA has been doing research around digital engagement for all the way back to Deborah Sexton days. And I remember her talking about it and talking about how digital's not going away, that it creates a lot of opportunity, but it's also a long-term game, right?
It
You're not
is.
going to see results
Yep.
overnight like you would some kind of marketing efforts, a longer thought process. So
It
how
is.
do you present on that data when you initiate the plan and you have to convince your stakeholders that this is intentional, it's a longer term solve when they're looking for immediate results? How do you find
Right.
that balance in that conversation?
Yeah. So there was a white paper that I was on the board when I think it was published, of PCMA, and it was PCMA and Freeman put this white paper together. It was like 5 years worth of data of showing all the touch points that said, okay, because I've been at three different associations that were afraid to go digital in one way, shape, or form, whether it was webinars or getting rid of the paper manuals and handouts and switching them to apps and
Printed
all of these
abstract
things.
books that are thicker
Posters,
than a
I've taken
textbook.
poster boards digital, all these things. But so I feel like I've had this conversation for 20 years, but you know, there's always going to be a naysayer. It's fine. It's change. People are not accustomed to change. If And it depends on how you build your strategy of what you're build, buying, and borrowing. If you're not costing a lot of money to build your strategy because you're doing some of it organically on social, you're doing some of it, it's just a matter of tracking how they're engaging with you, right? And then again, looking on the back end of how many people did we see an increase in, again, looking at what your goals and objectives were. Did our number of followers go up? Did we get more members? You have to analyze the campaigns and the efforts that you're putting in. But I do think that, you know, it is sometimes you need that data behind you, right? I mean, the white paper is probably still available on PCMA's website because I think somebody else, Carolyn Clark at Dahlia's agency, had like dug it up in the last 2 years because she was one of the authors on the paper. So I know it's been out there floating around in the last 2 years again too. But the growth that people have seen on the engagement during the pandemic should also help you to be able to say we need to continue to engage with them and work on the conversion. Even if what you gave them was free, right? They found value in it because they gave up their time to participate. And that is a huge resource, sometimes more valuable than the money that they're putting in. So, again, I think you have to look at what did that new audience participate in? And then how do you tweak that to say, I can offer this to you again? And maybe not in the same way, that was a lot of effort that you put in for that annual meeting, but how can you make it smaller, right? And say, here's something, let's test this. Because you have to experiment with how they want to show up, especially if you gave it for free. It doesn't mean that they don't want to convert, but just because they say no right away doesn't mean they're not following things that don't pay, that don't cost. But then look at your model. Have you changed your model, your pricing model for your event, or your pricing model for your organization? Like, can you do that freemium model and lock some content and have it be a smaller, dollar amount that they have to pay for? Because if you haven't changed your organization's pricing model or membership model, I think there was a lot of that going on beforehand. Before the pandemic, everyone's saying like it's kind of
Agreed.
antiquated. It's not going to work. What does this mean when Gen Z gets in the workforce? They don't see the same value in joining organizations. Well, you have to provide value, and you may have to look at your pricing structure, and that's bigger change. I get that, but when you're making those cases, like one size fits all doesn't fit in. So I do really think that the marketing strategy is part of it as well.
I agree. And I think we've been talking for equally as long about digital engagement as membership models and the changing and the freemium. And I think that's a whole nother elephant in the room is the membership model and what that looks like.
Yeah, it's a
Which
big
I
one.
think we have a session about that coming up because I think we're still sort of figuring out the pendulum is swinging a lot on that one. So we're still experimenting there. And as a reminder, I saw Sean pop on, so feel free to turn on your cameras, unmute yourselves, join us in this conversation. It is a breakout session, so feel free to join us. We did have a great question in the chat. This is a little more tactical of a question from Annette. How often do you think you have to have new content outside of events? So webinars, papers. Is there a point of oversaturation in engagement?
I absolutely think that sometimes too much is too much, right? And I think that confuses your audience. Where do they look and where are they going? So is there a clear message? And here's the thing: create a content calendar, right? Like, what are the really pertinent content that they want that you're like, oh my gosh, they need this. Um, and say, okay, is it once a month? Like, is it once a week? Is it twice a week? And again, looking at your audience, whether you're breaking it up by demographic, meaning again, like, that younger professional needs this versus, this audience needs this, right? I mean, you can break it up that way so that you're not trying to say, here's contract negotiation. I'm going to use a business medicine, right? Here's contract negotiations, and I think everybody needs it. Okay, maybe not. But what's new in force majeure that we need to know after this pandemic? Probably a lot more people are going to dial into that, right?
Sure.
Um, so I think it comes down to the content calendar that you can create to say how often you want to do it. And here's the thing: if your audience isn't participating, then that's an answer that there may be too much out there, right? And here's the conversation that has to be had internally then is, okay, let's look at what's performing and what's not performing, right? And where do we get those little bumps, the little blips that it's like, hey, we hit the mark on this. This is what it is. And redefine what success is. Because if you're getting a blip on something, then dig into that a little bit more. If people are ignoring some of the other stuff, well, again, what's going on in the industry around them? Or, if it's the right content, maybe you just have to continue to deliver it, right? I think we get burnt out. I mean, I have a degree in advertising, so that people have to see messages 5 to 7 times for it to even hit. I think sometimes we move on so quickly and are like, hey, we need new content because that nobody looked. Well, do you know how many, it's again that whole thumb scrolling on your phone, you know how much messages and that your people are getting inundated with? It doesn't mean that it necessarily didn't hit. Send the same information in a different way or to a different newsletter, send it on social and see if it's getting that hit. I think that sometimes we think, oh, it's not what they want. And it may just be they didn't see it because they didn't have time, you
I
know?
think that's a great point and something, my stint in the corporate world that got drilled in so much was 10 times 10 different ways. Our channel
Yeah.
chief said it all the time. We have the same message. We don't change on our message, but we're going to keep delivering it and meeting the people where they are 10 times 10 different ways. So I
Yeah.
think that's a great point. And thinking again, we've been talking about content. What does that mean? Having a content calendar beyond, so having webinars like this, maybe forums as another way of engagement. What are some of those other pieces of content? We've talked about videos, repackaging them. Is this, are we having to create new content every time? Can we bite size out, say this is going to be a 60-minute recording? Who's going to come back and watch 60 minutes? Not probably very many people. So can we segment out chunks of talking points from this? Is that considered new content?
Yes, I absolutely think content should be repurposed. It's have the plan before you go in and do it so that it doesn't take that much work on the back end. Because if you think somebody on your team wants to go back and sit through a 45-minute or an hour recording and be like, this is what we want, know what you're going to take. I also think there's value in saying, okay, we just want 15 minutes. And then we're going to have everybody watch the video. And then the actual session is talking about it. Like, I think that level of engagement is saying, you're committing to this, whatever, whether it's digital or online or face to face.
Yeah.
Watch this piece of content. We all watch content all the time, right? And then you get to have the cool discussion, and that's where the learning comes from, right? Um, I definitely think that, sometimes what we would do is for speakers, we would sometimes test them in a webinar and then put them on a stage somewhere or vice versa. They did so well that we were like, oh, everybody really wants to hear more from you. Can we build a series of webinars and things like that? I also think that, I when I listen to podcasts, I'm walking my dog. My dog doesn't often get walked for an hour. She just turned 8. But so therefore I don't look at a podcast if it's over an hour. I'm like, no way. I tune out, right? I start thinking about other things. That's me personally, right? Some people have long car commutes, right? And so, but again, more people are working from home. So how much time are they really in their cars, right?
Yep.
So I think when you think about your content, absolutely repurposing it. What are the sound bites? Use the GIFs for your social media, use it for your newsletters, so that you're creating some of that FOMO. You've got this great content, and definitely repurpose it and build a build cases around it. Right, that there's different pieces that you can bring people together and have them have conversations around it without the speaker being there. Right, it's your content, so definitely repurpose it for sure.
Yeah, I love that point. It's not some of the things that we talk about is, we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not asking people when we talk about engagement to create all these new things from scratch. A lot of it's just repackaging and reformatting stuff you already have at your disposal that's already been produced, just reintroducing it in a new way. And I love that.
And the other thing, again, PCMA has chapters. I worked at so many different organizations that had stake in state and local defense organizations, or special interest groups. Like, if one interest group is doing something really well within your organization, are they sharing that across? Are you guys helping them share it across so that you can be like, hey, this SIG did this and it's worked really well for them, and this is how they're sharing it, right? And now we're going to do this for you. We're going to do a pilot program, and we're going to test this out and share this content, right? um, because even if they're not seeing each other, but like, again, you look at some of the research and they can share the comments and they can see that, right? I mean, you can put the comments in a Google form and then you send it back out to them in a spreadsheet and be like, here's what everybody thought about this paper. Here was their opinion. And you've kind of got a grand round opinion on, a new topic. Yeah.
I agree, and I think at the start of the hour, you had mentioned the H word, the buzzword of the year, hybrid. I think micro is also one of the buzzwords going through right now. So we're in the chat. I see Barbara and Sean talking about bite-sized content,
Yes.
micro content, micro volunteering, giving nuggets of information and
Right.
opportunities for engagement. What's your thought on 15-minute content? I think when I say that, have PTSD of watching Fire Festival play out again because that's how they created FOMO when scrolling through Instagram, just getting that orange tile. That's how they built their FOMO. And how can we leverage micro volunteering in that way, or micro anything,
Yep.
that bite-sized content to create the FOMO spaces?
I'm a fan of micro learning because it goes back to what I said earlier that you want time to be able to process it. So if you are sitting in 45 minutes to an hour, and I know some sessions are still an hour and a half on the medical side because I came from that, um, you may forget those nuggets you learned at the beginning, right? And especially when it's more technical. I think the micro learnings, it takes a little bit more with your speaker development to make sure that they get to the impact part of it. Um, but I also think it's, there were some sessions that we used to do. It was like 2 minutes, two slides. That's all you get, and move on to the next point. Right. And we would power people through those, and people loved it because they didn't. And I'm going to say, you guys, regardless of what session you're in, or your attendees, if it's digital, all they are is one click away to walking away from your event. And so then they're not listening. They may be listening, but they're doing something else. And when you're in the audience, everybody's got this in their hands. So, why is more or longer better if you can keep them engaged, because the content and the impact and the value you're delivering is more important. And that's what you want, right? And I also think that, again, that interaction of who's in the audience, if you can bring the stakeholders, the thought leaders, the sponsors and the exhibitors, right? I mean, so many of those exhibitors and sponsors are the medical directors, science medical directors, and they're sitting there and they get to interact with the physicians. Let them. That's awesome. That's what you want, because that's how it's sparking those relationships for them, and then further development down the road on clinical trial or something like that. But you want, just like Sean and Barbara and everyone and Annette participating in this right here is helping to spark the engagement in the industry of the event, right? And to continue the conversation going to make sure that we're hitting on what matters. So I think that bite-sized, before the pandemic, I was saying like smaller regional events was the way of the future. I don't know if that is actually what will happen, but I'm always a fan of micro learning stages, and that's, whether it's a stage or a session. I just really do think it keeps people more engaged, for sure.
I agree. And I think you even nailed it earlier talking about extending the life of that content. So maybe the in-person is 2 to 5 minute, TED Talk style type of sessions, but then, oh, you want to learn more. There's a full length session video online you can watch later,
Right.
listen to it while you're walking back to your hotel room or going somewhere else. So I think just being able to offer those micro opportunities doesn't mean that there's no opportunity for the longer format sessions. I think it just maybe is presented differently, to your point
Right.
earlier of deep
And
diving.
agreed. And you said something too about yourself, how you are as a learner, and you're more shy. That you may, and one of the Sean's said he was shy. But people that are willing to chat here may be the learners that sit in the back of the room, and they may have their phone out, and maybe they are multitasking because they have, they're caring for a sick parent or a sick child, or they just have, too much on their workload right now. And so again, I think that when you think about how the learners want to engage, some may be like, oh my God, I love this, that I don't have to sit in the front of the room and I can just chat away with Sean and Barbara and Annette and I'm good, right? Where others are going to be like, I want to sit in the front of the class and I want to totally engage. So I do think that that's, a big piece of it is understanding, um, you know how you can get the most for your audience out of what you're offering. There's a place and time for the short term, and then the longer stuff. And again, if you're capturing it, you can always put it online too.
Absolutely. And I think bringing technology into the in-person experience, thinking about the shy people in the room, maybe the introverts. I'm never going to walk up to a microphone in a room of 1,500 people and ask a question. That's just not in my nature. But if I have an app where I can submit questions from my seat, I'm far more likely to engage in the session than I would walking up to a microphone and potentially asking an embarrassing question, to the group. So I think it also provides, in the age of DEI and thinking about inclusion, I think offering technology options really meets people where they are and creating a more inclusive environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, being able to interact regardless if you're online or in person, right? At Convening Leaders 22, I was sitting in the main stage running it. And once everything got started, then I was like, in the chat, kind of, answering questions because everybody was so excited about the hologram presence that we did. And it was like, oh, it's this company and, this is what we did and blah, blah, blah. And everyone was like, oh my God, that's so cool. And as soon as they were done understanding what it was and how we got Indra Nui there, then everybody was so engrossed in her content because it didn't matter that she wasn't in the room, and it didn't matter if you were watching digitally, because I talked to people after that were remote, and people that were in the room, because her content was spot on, and
Yeah,
it's what people needed to hear and wanted to hear, and they learned from it regardless of the cool technology that got us there, right?
for sure. Well, we're running out of time on this amazing discussion. We have about 10 minutes left. And I kind of wanted to go back to where we started. And that really is the why do we do it? We're all association and organizations that serve a membership, a customer base. We all have whys as our organization. So, how do we tie that why and our mission into this engagement strategy?
Okay, so sorry about life happening right there. But I think that, I'd love to hear from other people about, the why and what are your struggles, whether it's in your digital engagement or not. And if you're having problems on how you want to solve this. Obviously, um, we're all working. I think when you start with the why, you need to understand how you're defining success too, right? Like it's what are your goals and objectives, and then what are you going to be happy with, right? And that number, if it's a number, it continues to evolve, right? Because if people are um, if the right people, because this is the other thing, if you have the right people paying attention, then that is more important than just the masses. So I also, again, you kind of have to look at who's paying attention to you, especially if the quantity isn't where you want it. But I know that everything that I've seen in the last year of people that did attend face to face is that the level of people that were there and paying attention is exactly what people wanted. So you may have not had masses, but you had the right people in the room, whether that's digitally or face to face. And so I think that understanding your goals there are really important, and who's paying attention to understand the why. But you don't have to make it. It doesn't have to be a beautiful PowerPoint, but you should write down and understand, like, here's what the goals are, and here's what I'm trying to accomplish with this strategy. And you know, I don't like being, saying pivot. So I'm going to go with the design thinking and say you're in constant iteration, right? I've spent my entire career in constant iteration of my events because I was always on this continual improvement process. And then somebody was like, "Oh, it's design thinking," and I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that's what." Sure, I'm fancy. I'm
Yeah,
design
we'll call it
right,
that.
but once I started paying attention, and then I was like, "Oh, but." 27 years ago, it was here's the evaluations, here's what people are saying, here's what I'm hearing at the meeting. Let me make some tweaks to this and we're going to make it better. And I've done that, you can do that too. It's, you just have to listen.
I think you're making two great points just as we're rounding out the conversation of the strategy has to be firm and the tactics have to be fluid. You have to have an end goal of where you want to go, but how you get there is probably going to be a shoots and ladders type of
Right.
roadmap, but you have that end goal there. And then also just engaging people in the process so they understand this isn't an overnight type of solution, that there's going to be some time, there's going to be some transitions, and while you sort of figure out where to meet people and how to meet them.
Right. You know,
Awesome. Well, I want to round us out and thank you for the time today. Can you share with us where they can find you if people want to talk more engagement, how to contact you? Tell us where we can get you to keep talking engagement.
yeah, thanks so much. So Tonya at the tagagency.co is where shoot me an email. I'm also on LinkedIn, Tonya Almond, obviously. Excited to continue the conversation. And I appreciate everybody, whether you didn't come on screen. Thank you for being active in the chat. It's always nice to talk to you too, Megan. So thanks so much for including me in this.
Absolutely. Well, I hope everyone in the audience got some great information and some tactical solutions to solve this giant elephant in space in the room. We hope you'll join us for the next ones. And thank you, Tanya, and everyone for participating today. Oh, Tanya threw her email in the chat so you can continue the conversation and find her there to help work on your engagement strategy with your organization. So thanks, everyone, for the time today. Thank you, Tanya, and we'll see you at the next one.